Because that's one of the arguments that the Federated Farmers have put forward, is that we are already feeding 1% of the world's population, and the only way at the moment that we can cut our greenhouse gas emissions from farming is to actually cut how much food we produce.
And that's exactly the reason that our government deferred the entry of agriculture for 2 years. We've been saying, look, we're not wanting the emissions trading scheme as some form of new tax. What we want to do is to change behaviour. There's quite limited technology involved in agriculture right now, and that's why we've deferred the entry of agriculture.
How binding is the agreement that we signed in Kyoto? Do we have to do it? If we turn out to be the only country that's actually going as far down the line as we are going, can we pull back?
Well, let's firstly be clear about the point of Kyoto. It's a deal involving 38 of the world's developed countries. And the simple principle behind it is this: 80% of the increase in emissions being done by 20% of the population historically. And so when Kyoto was struck in 1997, they said, hey, look, you rich countries have been the bulk of the problem. That's why we've got the big increase in emissions. You need to take the first step. The second point is that we actually got a pretty good deal out of Kyoto. Our target is the fourth softest of those 38 countries. It's to stabilise our emissions at 1990 levels. Now, the problem is that they've actually gone up by 24%. If we're leading the world in anything as a developed country, it's actually in increasing our emissions. It is a binding agreement, and that's a really key part. If we don't get the ETS in place, we will exceed that target by we will basically breach our Kyoto commitment, and that will come at a cost. And so the ETS is crucial to New Zealand meeting its Kyoto targets by both stopping deforestation and getting those investments in reducing emissions.
We've spoken to a number of scientists on the programme in recent months, and whilst there seems to be a general consensus that there is climate change, whether or not it's caused by humans seems to be something more of a controversial subject. I guess, particularly after seeing that the fuss about the data that came out of the University of East Anglia, you start to wonder, are we putting an awful lot on science that hasn't yet been proven?
Well, the government doesn't take a jingoistic position on the science. You know, the previous government talked about it being a consensus, and I don't take that view. I do take the view, in my professional training and my PhD is in engineering, is that a really important role for government is risk management. Take earthquakes. It's not guaranteed that we're going to have an earthquake, but we've got billions of dollars invested in the EQC and we all pay levies to manage that risk. Exactly the same with climate change. I don't think the science is 100%, but I do think there is enough known to be worried. There's enough known to justify taking action. And there is absolutely no question that the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation has significantly increased the concentration of greenhouse gases, principally CO2, in the atmosphere over the last 150 years. It's set to double by 2050, double again by 2100. And I think it would be a brave person who would say that we can make those sorts of fundamental changes in the concentration of gases in our atmosphere without it having any effect. And that is why this government's taking a sort of a precautionary approach and saying, look, we're not going to bust the bank, we're not going to put prices up extraordinarily, but we are going to do New Zealand's share. We think it's smarter for us to take sort of a cautious first step rather than sort of delaying and then having to make a really radical change further down the track.
If Australia, which has put their ETS on the back burner for a bit, if they don't go into an ETS scheme of their own, will we continue further down the line, or will we harmonise with them?
There's a lot of confusion about what's taken place in Australia because people automatically assume that if they don't have an emissions trading scheme, that somehow there isn't a cost for their consumers. Well, in their budget a fortnight ago, the Australian government committed $5 billion to initiatives to try and meet their Kyoto targets. Of course, that will be paid for. That $5 billion has to be paid for by their consumers and their businesses. They've also introduced regulations or laws that require all electricity companies to have an increasing proportion of renewables. That policy is going to add 7% to the price of electricity in Australia. So the assumption is made, oh, Australia doesn't have an ETS, there's no cost for their consumers, they're not doing anything. That's wrong. What I would argue very strongly, and interestingly all of the official advice that the Australian government has had, is that an ETS is actually a more efficient way of doing it. It's just that they can't get their political act together to be able to do it through that more efficient mechanism.
Dr Smith, it's been great to talk to you. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.